There comes a moment in life when you watch people you cherished, friends, family, even those you believed were sent by God, slowly drift away. They leave without explanation, without reason, without remorse. It feels like a betrayal, a wound that cuts deeper than any blade. And in that silence, in that unbearable void, a question lingers. Why would God allow this? Why would He, in His infinite wisdom, permit people to walk out of our lives when He knows how much they meant to us? Imagine a man standing at the edge of a vast desert. The road behind him is littered with footprints, some deep and distinct, others fading into the wind. He turns back, searching for the ones who once walked beside him, only to realize he is now alone. It is in that moment of solitude, in that moment of aching loss, that he begins to hear the whisper of God saying, "Do not call unclean what I have made clean. Do not hold on to what I have removed. Trust me, for I see beyond what your heart desires." Acts 10:15. Could it be that the people who left were never meant to stay? Could it be that their exit was not an accident, not a failure on your part, but a divine intervention? The human heart clings. It clings to relationships, to memories, to familiar faces. We fight for people, we plead with them to stay. We chase after what was, desperate to rebuild what has crumbled. But in doing so, we forget a fundamental truth. Not every attachment is meant to last. Consider the story of Abraham and Lot. They walked together for years, bound by blood, by history, by shared struggles. But there came a day when the land could no longer sustain them both. And so, a separation was necessary, Genesis 13, 8-9. Not because of hatred, not because of failure, but because God had different plans for each of them. There are people in your life who were never meant to accompany you into your next season. You see, God, in His mercy, does not always reveal the full picture. He allows relationships to form, bonds to be built, and love to grow. But when the time comes, when their chapter in your story has been fulfilled, He removes them. And we mistake that removal for rejection, when in reality it is protection. For my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways, declares the Lord. Saith 55:8. There is a hidden mercy in unanswered prayers. You may plead for someone to return, to mend what was broken, to restore what has been lost. But what if that person was never meant to go where God is leading you? What if their presence would only hinder the work God is trying to do in you? You don't see it now. You only see the empty seat at your table, the absence of a voice that once comforted you. But God, He sees what you cannot. He knows the battles ahead, the storms you will face, the weight you must carry, and He knows who is strong enough to endure with you and who is not. They went out from us, but they were not of us, for if they had been of us, they would have continued with us. John 2:19. Some people leave because their role in your life is complete. Some leave because their presence would only bring destruction. Some leave because they were never truly with you in the first place. And in all of it, God is sovereign. If you find yourself in that place today, if you are mourning the loss of someone who walked away, if you are questioning why God allowed it, remember this: no departure happens without His permission. No loss occurs without purpose, and no ending is truly an ending in the hands of a God who redeems all things. It is time to stop chasing what God has removed. It is time to trust that He is doing something far greater than you can comprehend, and it is time to let go. The 7 profound reasons why God allows people to walk away from our lives. God removes people to protect you from harm. The heart is often blind to the dangers it clings to. We hold on to people, unaware of the unseen threats they carry. We embrace relationships without knowing what lurks beneath the surface. But God sees. He sees what you cannot, and in his divine mercy he removes those who would bring you harm before you ever realized the damage they could inflict. Consider the Israelites wandering through the wilderness. They had been freed from the chains of Egypt, yet they longed for the very place that enslaved them. Their hearts clung to what God had already destroyed, and what did he do? He led them away. He refused to let them return to the place of their suffering. You shall not return that way again, Deuteronomy 17:16. There are people in your life who appear harmless, even good. But what if their presence is keeping you from your destiny? What if their influence is leading you astray in ways you don't yet perceive? God, in his wisdom, does not always explain. He does not give warnings carved in stone. He simply acts. A friend drifts away, a relationship crumbles, a door closes. And we, in our limited understanding, mourn what was lost, not realizing we have been spared from destruction. Perhaps you have begged God for answers. You have asked why someone you loved suddenly turned cold, why a friend betrayed you, why a person you trusted disappeared without a trace. But let me ask you, if God were to show you everything that person said behind your back, if he were to reveal their hidden thoughts, their concealed intentions, would you still weep for them? There is a way that seems right to a man, but its end is the way to death. Proverbs 14:12. We judge by appearances, but God judges by the heart. He does not see as we see. He knows when a person carries poison disguised as sweetness, when a seemingly harmless presence is a doorway to destruction. And so, he removes them, not to punish you, not to hurt you, but to protect you from a future you cannot yet see. Think of Joseph, betrayed by his brothers, thrown into a pit, sold into slavery. If ever a man had reason to mourn those who walked away, it was him. But what did Joseph say when he finally stood before his brothers in power? You meant evil against me, but God meant it for good. Genesis 50:20. God's protection does not always feel like protection. Sometimes it feels like abandonment. It feels like loss. But what if that loss was the very thing preserving your soul? What if the one you are crying for was sent to destroy you? Look at the way Jesus handled those who walked away. The rich young ruler approached him full of enthusiasm, desiring to follow him. But when Jesus told him to let go of what he cherished most, the young man turned and left. Did Jesus chase after him? Did he plead for him to stay? No, he let him go. Mark 10:17-22. And what of Judas? Jesus, in his infinite wisdom, knew from the beginning that Judas would betray him. He knew the silver coins would be weighed, the kiss would be given, the betrayal would unfold. Yet he never stops it. He allowed Judas to leave the table, because some people are meant to exit, and when their role is done, God lets them walk. It is hard to see protection in the middle of loss. It is difficult to understand why someone's presence is removed when their absence causes so much pain. But God does not always explain. He simply acts. And when he does, our task is not to resist, not to chase, but to trust. God removes people because he sees the destruction they would bring. He separates you from them because he knows their departure is the very thing that will save you. And though you do not see it now, one day you will look back and realize you were not abandoned, you were rescued. Some relationships are seasonal, not eternal. There is a sorrow that grips the soul when someone we cherish drifts away. We mourn not just their absence, but the story we had written in our hearts, the assumption that they would always be there. But what if we were never meant to hold on to them forever? What if their purpose in our journey was not to stay, but to pass through? The human heart struggles with impermanence. We long for stability, for relationships that last a lifetime. Yet Scripture is filled with examples of divine appointments, connections meant for a time, but not for eternity. Consider the story of Naomi and Ruth. When Naomi's life fell apart, when she lost her husband and sons, her daughters-in-law stood at a crossroads. One, Orpah, chose to leave, while Ruth chose to stay. Ruth 1:14-16. Many read this story and praise Ruth's loyalty, but they overlook Orpah. She was not evil. She did not betray Naomi. She simply left because her season in Naomi's life had ended, and Naomi did not beg her to stay. She understood a truth most of us resist. Not everyone is meant to walk with us until the end. For everything there is a season, and a time for every matter under heaven. Ecclesiastes 3:01. Seasons. That is how God orchestrates life. The tree does not mourn the falling leaves in autumn, nor does the ocean grieve the retreating tide. There is a time for everything, a time to embrace and a time to let go. But the struggle comes when we try to force what was meant to be temporary into permanence. Think of Jesus and his disciples. He walked with them, taught them, shared his deepest wisdom with them, but when the time came, even they scattered. Even Peter, the most devoted, denied him when the moment of testing arrived. And yet, Jesus did not resist this. He did not chase after those who left. He understood that some relationships, no matter how deep, are seasonal. Perhaps you have tried to hold on to someone who was never meant to stay. You have begged, pleaded, prayed for them to return. But what if their presence in your life was only for a chapter? What if their role was to shape you for a time, to teach you something vital, but not to journey with you forever? God, in his wisdom, allows certain people to enter your life for a divine purpose. Some come to guide you, some come to challenge you, some come to test your heart, and some come to prepare you for the next stage of your destiny. But when their purpose is fulfilled, God allows them to leave. Look at Paul and Barnabas. They were co-laborers in the gospel, united in mission, yet at a certain point their paths diverged. Not because of failure, not because of betrayal, but because their journeys required different directions. Acts 15:36-40. If even those who carried the gospel were separated by divine timing, why do we believe that all relationships must last forever? There is a hidden grace in seasonal relationships. They stretch you, mold you, and refine you. But when their season ends, you must learn to release them with gratitude rather than grief. Holding on to what God has removed does not preserve the past. It only delays the future he has prepared. And so when someone walks away, when a door closes, when a familiar presence fades into the distance, remember this: their time in your life was a gift, not a guarantee. And the God who sent them for a season will bring exactly who you need for the next. Rejection is often divine redirection. Rejection is one of the deepest wounds a soul can endure. It whispers lies that you are not worthy, not good enough, not wanted. It pierces the heart with the sting of abandonment, leaving a scar that lingers long after the moment has passed. But what if rejection was not the curse you believe it to be? What if it was the hand of God gently closing a door to protect you from walking into a place you were never meant to enter? In our limited understanding, we see rejection as a failure, a sign that we were not chosen, not valued. But God does not operate as the world does. He allows rejection because he sees what we cannot. He knows the future we do not yet comprehend. And so, in his mercy, he removes what we stubbornly try to hold on to. Think of Moses standing before Pharaoh, pleading for the release of his people. Time and time again, Pharaoh's heart was hardened. Time and time again, the door to freedom seemed shut. But God was at work. What looked like rejection, what looked like God allowing his people to remain in bondage, was actually preparation for a miraculous deliverance. Had Pharaoh agreed too soon, the Israelites might have left without witnessing the mighty hand of God splitting the sea before them. Exodus 14:21-22. Rejection is not God's way of depriving you. It is His way of redirecting you towards something far greater. The stone the builders rejected has become the cornerstone. Psalm 118:22. This is the paradox of rejection. What is cast aside, dismissed as unworthy, often becomes the foundation upon which something greater is built. Jesus Himself, the very Son of God, was rejected by men. He was despised, abandoned, left to suffer alone. Yet it was through that rejection that salvation was made possible. Had He been accepted by all, had He been crowned by men rather than crucified, the world would have never known redemption. What if the rejection you are facing is not a punishment, but a setup for something greater? What if the person who walked away, the opportunity that slipped through your fingers, the door that refused to open, was all part of a divine plan to place you exactly where you need to be? Consider Joseph. His own brothers rejected him, casting him into a pit, selling him into slavery. He was forgotten in prison, betrayed, left to wonder why God had allowed such suffering. But years later, when he stood before the very brothers who had abandoned him, he spoke a truth that echoes through time. You meant evil against me, but God meant it for good. Genesis 50:20. What was meant to break him was the very thing that positioned him for his purpose. The rejection he endured became the redirection that led him to the highest place in the kingdom. God will often remove you from where you do not belong. He will allow people to turn their backs on you, allow doors to close in your face, allow plans to collapse, not because He has abandoned you, but because He is leading you elsewhere. And yet we resist. We cry out, asking why the opportunity was denied, why the person left, why the friendship faded. But what if we could see as God sees? What if we understood that every rejection is a thread in a greater tapestry, weaving a path towards something we would never have chosen on our own? For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans for welfare and not for evil, to give you a future and a hope. That door that closed, that person who rejected you, that path that vanished before your eyes, it was never meant to be yours. Not because you are unworthy, but because God has something far better in store. And though it may not make sense now, one day you will look back and see that the rejection you once mourned was actually grace in disguise. God tests your faith through loss. Faith is not tested in abundance. It is not tested in comfort or in seasons where everything is secure. True faith is tested in loss. In the moments when God removes what we thought we could not live without. It is in these moments of stripping away, of standing before the wreckage of what once was, that we discover the depth of our trust in Him. Throughout Scripture, God's greatest servants were refined not in ease, but in loss. Look at Job, a man described as righteous, devoted, and faithful. Yet in a single moment, everything he loved was taken from him. His children, his wealth, his health. The world saw a man cursed. His friends whispered that he must have sinned, that surely God would not allow such suffering if Job had been righteous. But Job understood something deeper. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. Job 1:21. That is the test of faith. Not to praise God when He gives, but to trust Him when He takes away. To believe, even in the emptiness, that He is still working, that He is still sovereign, that He is still good. Loss is an uncomfortable teacher. It shakes the foundations we stand on. It forces us to examine whether we have placed our faith in God or in the things He has given us. If a person leaves your life and you are left broken, could it be that your trust was in them rather than in God? If an opportunity vanishes and you feel hopeless, Was your hope in the opportunity rather than in the one who provides? Some trust in chariots and some in horses, but we trust in the name of the Lord our God. Psalm 27. God will often remove what we depend on so that we learn to depend on Him alone. He stripped the Israelites of Egypt, not just physically but mentally. They had been slaves for generations, and though they were freed, their minds still longed for the security of their oppressors. So God led them into the wilderness, a place where all earthly stability was removed. No home, no routine, just dependence on Him for daily manna, for water from a rock, for direction by a pillar of fire. It was in the wilderness that their faith was tested. Loss has a way of exposing what is truly in our hearts. When people walk away, when plans fail, when everything familiar is taken, what remains? Do we still trust that God is leading us? Or do we collapse, believing He has abandoned us? Consider Abraham asked to sacrifice his son Isaac. The very child God had promised, the very blessing he had waited for, was now being taken from him. It made no sense, it felt cruel. And yet Abraham obeyed because he understood something most of us forget. Faith is not about understanding. Faith is about trust. By faith, Abraham, when he was tested, offered up Isaac, considering that God was able even to raise him from the dead. Hebrews 11:17-19. God's tests are not meant to destroy us. They are meant to refine us, to strengthen the roots of our faith so that they run deeper than circumstance. He takes away, not to punish, but to reveal where our true foundation lies. If you have experienced loss, if God has removed people, opportunities, or comforts from your life, ask yourself, is my faith still standing, or was it built on things that could be taken away? The true test of faith is whether we trust Him even when we do not understand, even when He takes away what we thought we needed, even when we stand in the wilderness empty-handed, waiting for Him to provide. Because it is in that waiting, in that place of loss, that faith is purified and made unshakable. When people walk away, God steps in. There is a sacred silence in the space left behind when someone walks away. A silence that echoes with unanswered questions, with memories of what was, and with the aching loneliness of what is no more. But that silence is not empty. It is in that silence that God steps in. We often mourn the departure of people because we assume their presence was essential. We convince ourselves that without them we will be lost, broken, incomplete. But what if their absence was the very thing that created space for God to reveal Himself in a way you have never known before? Look at Hagar, cast out from Abraham's household, wandering in the wilderness with her son. She had been rejected, discarded, left to fend for herself in a desolate place, and in her despair she cried out. But she was not alone. Then God opened her eyes, and she saw a well of water. Genesis 21, verse 19. It was not until she was abandoned that she encountered God in a way she never had before. He revealed Himself as the one who sees, the one who provides, the one who does not walk away when others do. This is the pattern of God. He does not compete for your attention. As long as you are occupied with people, as long as your trust is placed in human relationships, you may not recognize His presence. But when people leave, when you are stripped of all distractions, He steps in. Consider Elijah, fleeing into the wilderness, exhausted and alone. He had witnessed miracles, had stood in the presence of kings, yet he still felt abandoned, as if his purpose had come to an end. And it was in that place, isolated, weary, defeated, that God revealed Himself in a way Elijah had never known before. Not in the earthquake, not in the fire, but in a gentle whisper. 1 Kings 19:11-12. God is not absent in your loneliness. He is more present than ever. He does not leave when people walk away. He waits for that moment, because it is then that you are finally still enough to hear Him. Be still and know that I am God. Psalm 46:10. Stillness is often forced upon us. We do not choose it willingly. We resist the silence, trying to fill it with noise, with distractions, with desperate attempts to bring back what was lost. But in doing so, we miss the voice of the one who has been there all along. Think of Paul, abandoned by those who once stood by him. Yet in his final letter, he does not lament their absence. He recognizes something far greater. At my first defense, no one came to stand by me, but all deserted me. But the Lord stood by me and strengthened me. Timothy 4:16-17. That is the promise. When others leave, he remains. When the world turns its back, he steps forward. When you stand alone, you are not truly alone. And yet, we grieve the departure of people as if they were the foundation of our existence. But God allows these moments to remind us of something crucial. Human presence is temporary, but His presence is eternal. He allows relationships to fade so that we may anchor ourselves in the one who will never leave nor forsake us. Even if my father and mother abandon me, the Lord will hold me close. Psalm 27:10. If someone has walked away from your life, do not believe the lie that you have been forsaken. Do not think for a moment that you have been left empty. What you have lost in people, you will gain in the presence of God. What was taken from you will be replaced with something far greater. A deeper, more unshakable relationship with the one who never leaves. Letting go allows room for greater blessings. It clings to memories, to familiar voices, to the comfort of what once was. Letting go is never easy, especially when what we are holding on to once brought us joy, security, and a sense of belonging. But the hands that refuse to release the past will find themselves too full to receive what God is waiting to give. God cannot pour new blessings into hands that are tightly grasping what He has already removed. Yet we resist. We pray for restoration when He is calling us to release. We beg for something old when He is preparing something new. And in our stubbornness, we fail to see that what we are fighting for is often far less than what He desires for us. Look at Abraham, standing on the mountain, knife in hand, ready to sacrifice his beloved son, the son he had prayed for, waited for, cherished, and yet God asked for him to be laid on the altar. It was not cruelty, it was a test to see whether Abraham loved the gift more than the giver. And in the moment Abraham let go, in the moment he surrendered what he cherished most, God provided something greater, a ram in the thicket, a revelation of His divine provision. Genesis 22:12. This is the mystery of God's blessings. They do not come to those who cling, but to those who trust. To those who, even in their pain, even in their confusion, open their hands and say, "Lord, I surrender." It is not that God delights in taking from us. It is that He knows what we refuse to release will one day hinder us. Consider the Israelites wandering through the wilderness. God had delivered them from Egypt, had broken their chains, had led them into freedom. But their hearts still longed for the past. They remembered Egypt not as a place of suffering, but as a place of familiarity. And so they grumbled. They resisted. They longed for what God had already removed. They could not receive the promised land because they were still holding on to Egypt. Numbers 11:04-6. How many times do we do the same? We hold on to people who have left, clinging to the hope that they will return, that things will go back to how they used to be. But what if their departure was the very thing making space for God's next blessing? What if holding on to them is keeping us in the wilderness when God is calling us to the promised land? Forget the former things. Do not dwell on the past. See, I am doing a new thing. Isaiah 43:18-19. New things cannot come while we are still living in the shadow of the old. God does not give us greater blessings while our hands are full of past burden. He calls us to let go, to step into the unknown, to trust that whatever He takes, He replaces with something far better. Look at Ruth, a widow in a foreign land. She had lost her husband, had left her home, had released everything familiar, and in that letting go, she made room for a greater blessing. Boaz, a new beginning, a lineage that would one day lead to the birth of Christ. Ruth 4:13-17. Had she held on to the past, had she remained in Moab, she would have never stepped into the destiny God had prepared for her. Letting go is not easy. It feels like loss, like surrender, like stepping off a cliff with no safety net. But what if the very thing we fear losing is the weight that is holding us down? What if what we are clinging to is not God's best for us, but only a shadow of what He intends to give? Jesus Himself spoke of this truth when He said, "No one puts new wine into old wineskins. If he does, the wine will burst the skins, and the wine is destroyed, and so are the skins. But new wine is for fresh wineskins." Mark 2:22. New wine, fresh blessings, greater things. But they require a release of the old, a willingness to trust that what God removes, He replaces with something infinitely better. There is no blessing in fighting for what God has called you to let go. There is no peace in clinging to something He has already taken away. The only way forward is surrender. The only way to receive is to release. And though it may feel like loss in the moment, one day you will look back and realize God was not taking from you. He was making room for something greater. You are never truly alone. God is with you. There are moments when solitude overwhelms us, when the absence of a familiar presence creates a void so vast it seems to echo in every fiber of our being. In these times, the heart may feel abandoned, burdened by the weight of loneliness, yet the divine promise remains: you are never truly alone. God is with you. Even in the darkest valleys, when human voices have receded into silence, the whisper of the Almighty resonates, a constant reminder that His presence is eternal and unyielding. Throughout the ages, souls have wrestled with the isolation of the human condition. The prophet Isaiah proclaimed, "When you pass through the waters, I will be with you, and through the rivers, they shall not overwhelm you." Isaiah 43:2. Such words are not merely poetic, they are the bedrock upon which faith is built. They remind us that in every trial, in every moment of despair, the Creator walks beside us. Even when earthly companions depart, His steadfast companionship fills the empty spaces of our lives. Consider the story of King David, a man whose heart echoed with both triumph and anguish. In the solitude of his trials, David penned psalms that still comfort us today, such as, "Even though I walk through the darkest valley, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me." Psalm 23:04. David's words speak to a truth that transcends time. The divine presence is our constant shelter, a refuge in moments of uncertainty. His life, marked by both companionship and abandonment, testifies that when human loyalty falters, divine faithfulness endures. It is often in our moments of deepest isolation that God's love becomes most palpable. Like a gentle yet persistent light, His presence illuminates the shadowed corners of our hearts. When we feel most alone, when our tears seem endless and our hope dim, we are invited to lean into His everlasting arms. For He has promised, "I will never leave you nor forsake you." Hebrews 13:5. A covenant that assures us that no matter how desolate our surroundings may appear, the divine is ever near. In our journey, we may encounter seasons when relationships falter, when friends vanish, and when we question whether any being truly understands our pain. Yet, in these moments, the presence of God becomes more than a comfort. It becomes the very essence of our hope. The Apostle Paul, writing from the depths of his own isolation and suffering, declared that in every circumstance he rejoiced in the knowledge of Christ's abiding presence. His life, punctuated by solitude and sacrifice, reflects a profound reality. Our loneliness is not a void to be feared, but a space to be filled by divine love. This truth is further exemplified in the life of Jesus. In the Garden of Gethsemane, as he faced the agony of separation from those he loved, he prayed in anguish, yet remained anchored in the certainty of his Father's presence. When the world abandoned him, when every friend and admirer turned away, Jesus did not stand alone. Instead, he was enveloped by the assurance that the Father's love would sustain him. His life, marked by divine companionship in the face of human abandonment, models for us that true solace comes from the presence of God alone. In our modern lives, the hustle and clamor of daily existence often mask the quiet companionship of the divine. We may search for solace in transient human connections, only to find that they pale in comparison to the unfailing love of our Creator. When the noise of the world subsides, there is a sacred stillness in which we can sense the gentle heartbeat of God. It is in these quiet moments, when we pause to listen, that we discover a comforting truth. Every step, every breath, every tear is observed and cherished by the one who made us. No matter the circumstances, whether amid the roar of the storm or the silence of the night, God's promise remains unaltered. His presence is not contingent upon our circumstances or the loyalty of those around us. It is an ever-present reality, as constant as the rising sun and as enduring as the stars. The divine companionship we receive is not fleeting or conditional. It is a timeless covenant that assures us, even when the world appears barren, that we are enveloped in a love that transcends human understanding. In moments when despair threatens to overwhelm, when the ache of loneliness seems insurmountable, remember the promise: you are never truly alone. The divine stands with you, a steadfast companion whose love endures beyond the ephemeral nature of human connection. His presence fills the emptiness, transforming isolation into intimacy and solitude into sacred communion. There is a mystery in the way God orchestrates our lives, a divine weaving of moments, people, and seasons that sometimes makes no sense to our human minds. We hold on to relationships, believing they are permanent, only to watch them slip through our fingers. We mourn when people walk away, questioning why God allows such losses, not realizing that what we call loss, He calls alignment. God does not remove without reason. He does not allow departures without purpose. Every person who has stepped into your life had a role to play, a lesson to teach, a purpose to fulfill, and when their time is done, He allows them to leave, not as a punishment, but as preparation for what is ahead. We must trust that if God has taken someone away, it is for our good. He removes to protect, to redirect, to refine. He tests our faith through loss, teaching us that our dependence should never be on people, but on Him alone. He allows relationships to be seasonal, because not everyone is meant to walk with us forever. And in every departure, in every moment of solitude, His presence fills the void, reminding us that we are never truly alone. There is a reason why you had to experience this. There is a reason why certain people had to leave. You may not see it now, but one day you will look back and understand. What you thought was a painful ending was actually a divine beginning. What you grieved was not taken from you, but rather you were being freed. God was making room. So let go. Release the weight of what was and step forward into what is to come. Trust that the God who removes is also the God who restores. The God who allows loss is the same God who brings increase. If He has allowed someone to walk away, do not chase after them. Stand firm in the knowledge that what He has prepared for you is far greater than anything you are leaving behind. And when you feel alone, when the silence seems unbearable, remember this: you are never truly alone. God is with you. His presence is unwavering, His love unshaken. He is not just the God of open doors, but also the God of closed ones. He is not just the God of arrivals, but the God of departures. And in all things He is working for your good. Trust Him, let go, and make room for the greater blessings that are coming.